Response video to a video by Loreleila. Third video on this subject, and I don't know. I don't know where it's going exactly. The title is much worse than the video itself. The video itself wasn't too bad, but the title is "The False Correlation Between Sentience and Suffering," and that to me just doesn't make any sense. There's a very realistic correlation between how conscious, how capable of feeling, sensing, positive and negative sensations anyway, qualitative value statement type sentience. Obviously just feeling is one thing. How the body reacts to that feeling, like to turn the feeling into a sense of pain or a sense of foreboding or fear, that's a different function of the brain than just, it's like seeing and recognizing a threat. These are two different things. The seeing is one thing, the recognizing what you're seeing is another function. So anyway, yeah, well, I agree with the basic premise that our intelligence is not necessarily a feeling enhancer. That sensations, raw sensations of unpleasant sensations or pleasurable sensations exist in other animals just as substantively as they exist in us. We're not superior in terms of the raw feelings. The catch would be is that because of our intelligence or our more complex psychology, we're both able to extract ourselves from some negative sensations because we can calm ourselves or relieve ourselves or know it's not permanent or know something else, and help mitigate against the suffering. But at the same token, we can do exactly the opposite, which is we can get hysterical over ghosts and boogeymen that we create, and create our own blight of suffering over something that an animal wouldn't even see, wouldn't even know existed. So it could never fear or be terrified by that idea. So yeah, I mean, we can suffer watching somebody else suffer, where an animal really isn't going to be capable of that. They might be able to suffer over watching what they can recognize, which is a scream or something else that might bother them, like a baby crying. Their baby crying might give them anxiety or a sense of worry and fear. So anyway, but yeah, a lot of that they're not going to recognize because they don't have the intelligence to recognize it. So yeah, but that's more about opportunity to feel, not how we feel. So those really are two different subjects. So anyway, but this idea that lower forms do feel, and they might feel very intensely, does create a problem. And I just don't understand how. I mean, you're going back as far as a carrot, and you're saying, okay, I'm not saying a carrot feels. Okay, but where are you going to draw this line? And then you sort of speculated that maybe insects do have this capacity, and yeah, I think that might be right. I would argue that anything that can learn is conscious. That's what consciousness is the transition from reflexive, programmed, hard programming, programming that you're born with, and that transition between that and what is augmented or, available programming. It can be, on-the-fly programming, learning, and consciousness enables. Consciousness is the line where things are able to learn, and yeah, we don't really see anything doing complex learned behavior without that we would put in the category of unconscious. There's just no example of that. Somebody wrote mushrooms or something or fungus on one of my things, but I don't think that has anything to do with learning. I think that just has to do with changing the time cycle in the fungus. Funguses are used to reacting to sunlight, and so if you artificially change those cycles through some sort of other mechanism of disturbance, you'll probably just break their time clock, and then they'll just keep, the time clock will have to get reset. But anyway, that's a whole different subject. Don't want to go there, but everybody just throws these little bits and pieces in the videos, and you're just like, it is kind of irritating, because they really do deserve a response. Fred gets a lot of comments like that on his videos. You could do a whole video just on explaining how the comment is erroneous and irrelevant. There's a lot of those. But anyway, all right, so back to the sentience thing. Yeah, so I guess my biggest dig against your video is what you should be is saying is, life could be a million or billion times worse than we think it is. And you give the example of a crying baby. That babies or something. You said, how could anybody be so stupid? Wasn't that like calling somebody a fucktard? I mean, to say, oh, how could they be so stupid not to think babies feel? Well, I'm one of those people that is so stupid. That's right. Because I think, I don't think there'd be any practical purpose in it in the first place. There's no point in making something capable of feeling pain if they really can't react or act aggressively to do anything about it. And babies can't. We also know, I know from my own experience, so it's anecdotal evidence, but I think it's also documented experience, that babies are just hysterical little monsters, and they react to everything, and they have fits of hysteria, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything real. It just has to do with a mindset, and then they go into some hysterical crying fit, and there really wasn't any injury. Somebody went like this, and they decide they were offended, and they'll cry for a half an hour. So I don't think you can go by the reaction of a baby and say, that reaction duplicates a sensation, or it's the consequence of a sensation, a feeling of pain. It's a consequence of being tactilely influenced, but I think it can be described as a reflex, and it can be understood as a reflex because the higher functions of the brain have essentially aren't mappable yet. Their brain can't map until it orients. It has to do the gravity thing and all these other things, and there'd be no point in giving it this qualitative positive negative sensation to tie to events, because it can't understand the events well enough. So the conditioning would be useless. I mean, it would end up associating pain, like, if something happens in the wrong order, it's breastfeeding and something, the mother has to run from a tiger, the baby gets bounced all over the fucking place and harassed, somehow what? It's going to blame the breast for the harassment? It has no context, no capacity to understand what it is reacting to or what its body is in. So there'd be just no practical point in imposing any of this, because you can't do the learning that sensation is, I think, evolved to provide an opportunity to do. So I've described before, it's like a feedback thing. So the original organisms that were developing nervous systems, they were basically reflexes, okay, like a knee reflex. You didn't have to feel it, it just happens. Your body does it. It's automatic, autonomic as they call it. And so it never reaches the full brain, never does any sensation thing, it just does. And where things got different is there was the brain reacted. So it has a input, it interprets, and then it reacted with an action that was pre-programmed. Well, there was an advantage to having unprogrammed reactions, and I think that's when the feedback was changed. And so instead of just this linear line of action, of influence, and then some subtle software interpretation, and then action, there was a feedback. And so now since the reaction was fed back into the action, and I think that created the opportunity to attach this qualitative experiential notion to it, of a positive or a negative, like, you escaped, so it's a positive, or if things went right, you got rewarded. If things went wrong, it was discouraged. And so that became part of how our body and our mind learned to interact in the world, is through that quotient of evaluation, an evaluator. So there was an evaluator software that was running, and it would put an evaluation on events. And I think that's sort of the origin of sensation, in the sense of it having a qualitative, um, you know, pain, pleasure component, comfortable, uncomfortable, however you want to describe that. Uh, and so now it also creates this thing where now your brain is essentially reacting to what your brain is creating, I guess is another way to describe it. So you have this senses coming in from your five senses tied together. And what you basically have is this first opinion your brain gives you of not only your own state, but what's happening in the environment. And then your brain essentially looks at that complete state. It looks at what your senses are saying and how your body feels, and it's almost like it has another eye, and it sees that condition, all right, and adds that to its impression of what kind of action it'll take. And so now it's basically interpreting something it created. So it's creating this model of you, your condition, the world you're in. It creates this model perception in your head, and now it looks at that and then does a whole bunch of more processing to figure out what the reaction should be. And so it's almost like there's that gap, that separation between, it's almost like your brain is creating an LCD image with extras, let's call it, and then you're watching that LCD. At the same time, new information's coming in, but you're seeing that old information, and that's sort of, I think, the nature of this thing. So the point I'm trying to make with this argument is there's a time and place for sentience. There's no point in having it when you can't react or learn from it. So if you're not in a condition to react or learn, it's really quite useless. And I don't think nature would maintain it, or that it would arise if it didn't have a functionality. Now, certainly it could have a legacy situation, so maybe babies do feel because adults feel. But I still think I still think the evidence points to the fact that they don't, just because their brain isn't mature, it isn't finished, and we shouldn't assume it functions the same as a finished brain, because it's not finished physically, mechanically. It's not done yet. So anyway, the point I really wanted to get to was, let's say babies did feel. Now let's say your concern for it is legitimate. Well, what if every millisecond insects are feeling a million billion times more suffering than that one baby, because there's so many of them? So in every millisecond of that baby's cry, there's a billion insects crying, suffering, feeling exactly the same uncomfortable unpleasantness. Would that be enough for you to say life is a silly game? It's preposterously too expensive? I mean, if we take one horrible human event, like, the 16-year-old girl trapped underneath the tractor-trailer truck, burning to death. All right, we take that one horror, and we say, ooh, that's really nasty stuff. We've got to find a lot of good stuff to make up for that nasty shit. But what if, in the time that took for that one individual to feel that pain, there was a billion suffering creatures on Earth feeling just as much horror and suffering? I mean, how bad does the equation have to get? I mean, I already thought life was pretty pitiful when I just thought about how much suffering is going on in the world of higher mammals. I mean, if we go down to the level of insects, or fish, or, yeah, that's good enough right there. I mean, the numbers are preposterous. The amount of suffering is insane. And we can look at them and say, holy shit, they're not accomplishing anything. They're eating, shitting, and fucking. They're not doing anything. And they only fuck once, a lot of them. I mean, it really is shit. And so how do we justify it? How do you How do you put that in some place in your brain and say, oh yeah, it's all worth doing, let's have some more humans, let's keep playing the game? Because obviously that's all exists. We're all dependent on it existing. I mean, if you extract it from the environment, we're not going to be able to survive anymore, because a lot of those components are necessary to fertilize and maintain the um, the other matter that we're living on, the other functional matter, the vegetable matter. Um, so anyway, I just be curious how you balance this nonsense. We know it's a retard who created the universe, right? You're not speculating that a God did it, are you? So if you know it's just a, a probability experiment, if you know it's just well, it just turned out that way, you know it doesn't have any internal initial purpose. You know, pretty much, I think, that it doesn't accomplish anything in the end. There's no singularity where all the consciousnesses have an orgy or something. So if there's no initial purpose and there's no end accomplishment, how do you justify the price being paid to maintain this nonsense? Yeah, good enough. I don't know if there's anything else. But yeah, you do say, you know, how can people be so stupid? I mean, isn't that really the same as saying fucktard? I mean, really, is there a difference? But anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. All right, yeah, I didn't, not as concise as I'd like it to have been, but yeah, I just think there's no point in talking about sentience and carrots or talking about life, okay, like it's a continuum or something, because there's a huge difference, and there's especially a huge difference between life that has neurology and life that doesn't. The life that doesn't have neurology is just little consuming and reproducing machines. They should be called machines. They are not. They are not doing anything. Um, you know, without this sensation thing. All right, it's nothing. All right, it's a machine. All right, it has no meaning. Um, it represents nothing. It stands for nothing. It does not. It's fire. It's a diamond. It's just a material form. It just doesn't have any relevance to anything. So if we didn't have to worry about microbial life that is just a little reproducing machines evolving into sentience, it would be totally irrelevant. It would be as meaningless as rocks and dirt. I mean, yes, you could identify it as being different, but the difference would be irrelevant, meaningless, nothing. I mean, feeling is the whole fucking game. Can somebody make an argument describing some other game being played here than what affects feeling organisms? Shit. Anyway, till next time. And such. And so forth and whatnot. Hit the button. God, this camera.